We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 22nd of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from Studio 4 at Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich. Welcome to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, Israel takes on France, Australia and Norway.
I don't take these things personally. I engage with people. Diplomatically, he's had similar things to say about other leaders.
As diplomatic relations crumble between Israel and its traditional allies, what happens next and who will take whose side? And what happens to the citizens of Gaza? Also ahead, we take a look at Friday's newspapers and...
We learned this week of discombobulation at large among American conservatives as they struggle to adjust to the new online manner of California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Andrew Muller tells us what we learned this week and changes to Switzerland's banknotes. We'll ask what the new designs could look like and whether a banknote is still relevant here. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from Zurich. And a very warm welcome to Studio 4 here in Zurich in Dufourstrasse 90. The doors are open, the cafe is open, and the Globalist has decamped to Zurich for a one-off this morning, I should say, afternoon, wherever you're listening as well. Let's have a look at what's happening in today's news. California's state senate has passed legislation to redraw political districts. It's to help Democrats gain 5 more seats in the House of Representatives. The younger of 2 Menendez brothers who were convicted of killing their parents in 1989 has been denied parole, and large crowds of protesters have marched through the Georgian capital Tbilisi in support of independent media. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's ordered the start of negotiations for the release of the remaining hostages held by Hamas. He said that the end of Israel's operation in Gaza would be on Israel's terms. Meanwhile, thousands of Palestinians are leaving their homes as the Israeli military enters what it calls a new phase of combat in Gaza. The operation to take Gaza City has been widely condemned by the global community. To tell us more about both stories, I'm joined now by Julie Norman, who's a lecturer in politics and international relations at UCL and a senior associate fellow for the Middle East at the Royal United Services Institute in London, which is where from she joins me now. A very good morning to you, Julie. Thank you for coming on to The Globalist.
Good morning, Emma.
Just if you could outline this announcement that was made by Netanyahu last night, saying he's ordered the start of negotiations for the release of the remaining hostages held by Hamas. What more do we know about these plans?
Sure. So for the last several weeks, Netanyahu has been leaning into this idea of a comprehensive plan for a hostage release. That means that all hostages would be released at once for a complete end to the war. That's a big shift from the models that we've been working with for the last year. And I would point out a proposal and model that Hamas agreed to just earlier this week, which is more of a phased approach, which would see about half of the hostages released up front. Negotiations would continue on an end to the war, with the rest of the hostages released once that agreement was reached. So two very different models here. And I would point out for Israel, the comprehensive deal is controversial for a couple of reasons. One, hostages' families feel that this will just mean the release of no hostages, that no one will be coming home anytime soon. And moreover, for the international community, Netanyahu has said very clearly this would be ending the war on Israel's terms. And he's been clear what that means. It's not only freeing the hostages, it's also disarming Hamas, demobilizing the Strip, and perhaps most importantly, Israel maintaining security control over all of Gaza.
I mean, when you look at what he said, he's ordered the start of negotiations for the release of the hostages. That suggestion is that there have not been any negotiations.
That is also true in the way it's worded. I would say negotiations obviously have been ongoing in starts and bursts for the last year. And again, most recently in July with both parties. Again, since then, we've seen Hamas working with Qatari and Egyptian officials to keep on the deal that was on the table in July. They pretty much agreed to that this week. But again, for Netanyahu, this is too little too late. He says they have moved on to this more comprehensive plan alongside beginning this operation in Gaza City.
Tell us also about this operation in Gaza City and where that fits, because when you have Benjamin Netanyahu saying one thing, which is we're ordering the start of negotiations, that suggests a positive and a move which could lead to a positive conclusion. Yet we now have the whole world condemning large parts of the world, dare I say it. Let's be accurate about this, about this military operation in Gaza City, which has caused dozens, hundreds, thousands of people to flee.
That's exactly right. So Gaza City is one of the few parts of the Strip that Israel is not directly controlling at the moment. Israel controls about 75% of Gaza as it is. Gaza City is Gaza's largest urban area. It's been the site of multiple operations since the start of the war. And again, about half of Gaza's population has been living there. Israel has begun, I would say, forced evacuations, forced transfers from that area already. That area of the Strip has been bombarded by airstrikes over the last week. Dozens of people have been killed and tens of thousands are being displaced yet again. This, again, as you pointed out, has been condemned internationally, and it's been kind of a question mark of how much this was hype, if this was rhetoric from Netanyahu to try and pressure Hamas to either agree to a ceasefire, to disarm or something like this, or if this was actually a full intention to reoccupy Gaza City. What we're seeing right now is this operation is at least starting to move forward, and if there are so-called negotiations alongside this, it would be essentially negotiations under fire, this idea that this operation would be going on alongside any kind of talks. But I think it would be difficult for these negotiations to really move forward while this type of operation is taking place that's causing so much humanitarian devastation on top of the devastation that has been there, as well as essentially setting up Israel to control that part of Gaza afterwards.
It is setting Israel up against a large chunk of the international community as well. A good number of Israel's friends, I'm speaking about the likes of France, Australia and Norway, have found themselves in the middle of a diplomatic row with Israel over what Israel is doing. Just outline that for us, please.
Sure. So numerous states that are usually seen as pretty strong allies of Israel have started making different moves over the last several months, I would point out. Some of this started in July when the images of famine, of starvation started coming out from Gaza, when it seemed clear that a ceasefire deal was not going to go through. And then in the last several weeks, as Netanyahu started speaking very openly about this plan to retake Gaza and perhaps reoccupy the Strip. So we've seen recognition of a Palestinian state from, of course, the pending from the UK, from France, from Canada, from Australia. We've seen other forms of just censure of kind of declarations of just condemnation of this plan, also from many of those states. Australia blocked the visa for a far-right Israeli politician who was coming. So we're seeing these very vocal, I would say, steps from much of the international community. And Israel has been pushing back very hard, saying these moves are anti-Semitic, that these moves are going against Israel's right to defend itself and to defeat Hamas. So this is I would say, an intensifying diplomatic row, as you said. But I would also point out that many of the countries have not deepened sanctions, have not deepened some of the other real policy levers that they do have at their disposal.
So at this moment, this is just words.
Largely, I would say yes. I mean, I do think recognition of the Palestinian state has the potential to carry more weight and perhaps can be a foundation for pushing back more strongly on settlements, perhaps providing a foundation for more policy-based actions if needed. But right now, I would say those states are still keeping it more in the diplomatic realm.
The thing with Israel is that, rightly or wrongly, it has always pursued its own course, especially in the last few years following October the 7th. And it seems ready for this approach, not necessarily happy to cause problems with other nations, but this pushing back is a defiance that will last for how long, do you think, Julie?
Yeah, so I would say for Netanyahu in particular, he pretty much has said he doesn't really care what a lot of the European countries say, what other Western countries say. He doesn't see them as fully relevant to Israel's needs and mission on the ground. And moreover, he can say that because he still knows and feels he has the US's backing. And right now, the Trump administration, even though it's sometimes not being fully in sync with Netanyahu, has essentially given him green light over most of these decisions and policies, and Netanyahu knows that, and so he can be more dismissive of what other states are saying and doing.
And what longer-term effect would a more isolated Israel have?
Yes, I mean, Israel, I would say many in Israel are certainly worried that Israel is becoming a pariah state, that they will be subjected to more boycotts, to more isolation internationally. Again, I don't think Netanyahu personally is so worried about that, but it does affect a lot of, everyday people who are worried about being able to travel, about being able to do business internationally, about just Israel's moral impression in the world. So I've heard from some Israelis that they are very worried about this. Many are hopeful that the state can just weather this as much as possible to the next election and hope for a change then. But even that is not guaranteed, and it would probably not come for close to a year from now. So there's a lot of consternation, I would say, within Israel, and a real split in the population about how much these moves are really necessary for defeating Hamas and how much this is just really sinking Israel to a level that would be very difficult for it to come back from internationally.
Julie Norman from UCL and RUSI, thank you so much for joining me on the line from London. This is The Globalist, live from Zurich. Now, for a brief period post-election in 2023, Poland looked to be the country that could provide leadership across Europe. The Prime Minister Donald Tusk was a bridge between the European Union and the border with Ukraine. But since the election of a populist right-wing president, Poland has become less of a reliable partner. So let's find out more about this and indeed where Poland's role is internationally. Mateusz Mazzini is writer-at-large at Gazeta Wyborcza and a lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. A very good morning to you, Mateusz.
Very good morning. Thanks for having me, Emma.
And the big question is where was Poland at the White House on Monday?
Nobody really seems to have a clear answer to that question, because traditionally it was Prime Minister Donald Tusk who represented Poland in any of the coalition of the willing meetings, be it physical meetings or video conferences. It was always Tusk. In fact, he was one of the initiators of that very format. But that changed last week with the very first meeting of the coalition of the willing since the swearing in of the new Polish president, the far-right political debutante, if you please, Karol Nawrocki. And for the first time, as far as we gather, on the request of the American side, we had Nawrocki participating in that poll, and the information that has been leaked out to the public states or confirms unequivocally that it was the White House that insisted on Nawrocki's participation. And in fact, the Americans wanted Donald Tusk to be removed from all the elements of the video call, including the debrief with other European leaders following the conversation with Donald Trump on Wednesday. Through the weekend before the European delegation was heading to Washington on Monday to provide this diplomatic shield to Volodymyr Zelensky, the information available to the press through, let's call it, semi-official channels was that the government, including Prime Minister Tusk and Foreign Minister Sikorski, was convinced that Nawrocki was going to take part in the Washington meeting. But that changed quite abruptly in the morning of Monday when the head of the president's office declared that Poland didn't really insist on being invited into the White House this time around, mostly because Nawrocki is heading there for a bilateral meeting on September the 3rd. And the common interpretation, I would say, that we have right now is that Nawrocki could have pushed for an invitation. He could have gone to Washington, but through a very simple cost-benefit analysis, him and his team decided to stay in Warsaw, for the most part, because it would have been very uncomfortable to do a photo op with the likes of Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen, so people Nawrocki really dislikes and heavily criticized on the campaign trail just a few weeks ago. And being in Washington, he would be forced to sit next to them and declare support for any sort of peacekeeping forces or stability forces in Ukraine, even without sending Polish troops.
So just to outline this cost-benefit analysis point that you've just made, this is a decision made by the Polish president not to attend a meeting with senior European leaders and the president of the United States in order for the image to look better domestically.
Well, there's that British saying that all politics is always domestic politics, and that's very much the case this time. We need to remember that Nawrocki, even though he ran on an independent ticket with the backing of Law and Justice, the former populist nationalist governing party in Poland, his views politically are much further to the right. He's an ultra-conservative socially. He's rather Ukrainian skeptic, in places even anti-Ukrainian, and most of his electorate, the decisive part of the electorate that got him through the finishing line, is heavily anti-Ukrainian. So not taking part in this particular meeting, not risking that he would have to stand next to European leaders, Western liberal European leaders that he isn't a big fan of, let's put it mildly, was just a simple solution for him, because otherwise he would have risked heavy criticism on behalf of his own electoral base. The alternative was to break the unity of Europe and perhaps be the only leader present in Washington who wouldn't declare support or wouldn't say he is ready or his country is ready to provide some sort of security guarantees, even though it is even Prime Minister Tusk, who openly has been saying for the last year and a half that Polish troops in Ukraine is a red line that he isn't going to cross. So that isn't even a controversial topic here. But I think that the team of the new president wasn't going to take any risks, especially that early into his term.
How relevant or irrelevant does this now make Poland when it comes to the European story, given the fact that a couple of years ago, Donald Tusk was going to be seen as sort of leading Poland through moments of European stability. But also, let us not forget, as we have mentioned in this interview, that Ukraine is on Poland's border.
Well, sadly, Donald Tusk, at least on the international stage right now, is becoming a little bit of a lame duck. So constitutionally speaking, Poland isn't to face another parliamentary election for the next 2 years. Obviously, provided there isn't going to be a snap election, a conflict over budget early next year, or any other externality that we cannot foresee at this point. But Poland is definitely not going to take as much of an initiative diplomatically and politically as it perhaps was going to had it been had a different president right now, a president less hostile to the current government. And you're absolutely right to point out that since Tusk returned as prime minister in December of 2023, he was incredibly active on the foreign policy front, perhaps sometimes even more active in foreign policy than in domestic policy, which seems to be backfiring quite heavily right now. But Poland is sadly sliding into irrelevance on that front, which is a shame, because for the first 3.5 years, give or take, since the full-scale invasion into the Ukrainian territory, Poland was one of the most vocal and, most importantly, most effective advocates of the Ukrainian cause. That allowed for a creation of immense political capital, diplomatic capital within the European Union, within NATO, capital that's being squandered right now because the government and the newly elected president don't see eye to eye on Ukraine, just as they don't see eye to eye on pretty much anything.
Mateusz, finally, there was news yesterday that a drone from Russia struck Poland. No one was hurt, but people's buildings were damaged. Tell us a little bit quickly about that, and indeed the fact that within the wider context of what we've just been talking about, to have something like this happen, how does that change things?
So as far as we gather right now, the drone was a Russian-manufactured version of the Iranian Shahid drone, obviously already manufactured in Russia because they steal the Iranian intellectual property. It entered the Polish airspace from Belarus and crashed into a cornfield only 100 kilometers away from Warsaw, so that is a warning sign for both the Polish population and Polish authorities. This is a very uncomfortable topic right now for all the authorities in Poland, because it clearly reveals that Poland's air defenses on the drone front are very, very weak. These kinds of objects are impossible to be detected or shot down by F-16s because they are too small, too slow, and they travel on a too low an altitude. So there's a lot of awkward silence on behalf of the Ministry of Defense in Poland and even the Chancellery of the President, but experts are calling for the government to inquire immediately with international allies to have shared protection from drones, because it clearly shows A, that Poland isn't ready for this kind of threat, and B, these kinds of objects will be entering Polish airspace more and more frequently as Russia pushes and makes advances in Ukraine, and the front line, just from a geographical standpoint, gets closer to Poland.
Mateusz Mazzini from Gazeta Wyborcza in Warsaw. Thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. Still to come on today's programme.
Japan is a champion of development cooperation. As we see on full display here in TICAD, leadership across all these fronts is more crucial than ever.
We'll hear from the African Development Conference taking place in Yokohama a little bit later on The Globalist, live from Zurich.
Each of us has a craft, a calling that inspires us. Whether it's how a coffee is brewed, a chair is built, or how money is looked after. There's a love for the work, a care that compels you forward. For us at UBS, it's about designing a unique outcome for you. Because whatever your craft may be, ours is built around helping you succeed. UBS, banking is our craft.
We head back to London now to have a look at today's newspapers. Joining me is Paul Waldy, who's a Europe correspondent at the Globe and Mail. Good morning, Paul. How are you on your own in the studio in London? Here I am in Zurich.
I'm fine, thanks. Fine.
Good. Glad to hear it. So normally we do this via eye contact, so we're just going to have to busk this. Tell us what you found in the papers this morning. There's quite a lot of toing and froing when it comes to trade movements, positive deals between the US and the European Union. But some papers are reflecting on how, for those of us here in Switzerland, it's getting tougher.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, the whole trade issue is certainly not going away anytime soon. This week we had the EU and the US kind of unveil a statement about what Ursula von der Leyen and Donald Trump agreed to last month in Scotland. Not a lot of detail again. And of course, the big issue for the EU is the auto industry. And right now they're facing tariffs on exports to the US in the order of 27.5%. That's supposed to go down to 15%. But the US has said they won't reduce the tariff until until the EU takes steps to reduce all of its tariffs against the US. So, there's a waiting game going on here. The EU scrambling to get its legislation in place to do that. But in the meantime, of course, the auto sector, in particularly in Germany, is really fretting about the cost that these tariffs are going to have.
Indeed, because what is happening at the moment is Germany, as you say, is pushing hard for an agreement in order to continue exporting its cars to the United States, upon which it relies so heavily. And as the wait continues, big companies are losing money.
Well, they are. And I mean, the auto industry in Germany employs about 700,000 people. And the longer these kinds of extra high tariffs go on, the more impact it's going to have on jobs and on, of course, the big auto companies. So they're very keen for the EU to get its act together and get moving on whatever it is they need to show to the US. There is some suggestion that if the EU can get something started, that tariff reduction would be retroactive to August 1st. I think that right now is what everybody's aiming towards. But in the meantime, it's just a waiting game, and everybody doesn't know what's going to happen if Trump changes his mind again tomorrow or something.
In the meantime, if you're here in Switzerland, or indeed if you're a Swiss watchmaker and you're exporting your goods to the United States, July was a boom month because they knew that the 39% tariffs were just about to hit, so lots of people bought their watches.
Well, that's just it, right? I mean, it looks good on paper that, a luxury watch sales out of Switzerland spiked up in July, but that's, as you mentioned, a pre-order thing. They're trying to get those purchases done before this 39% tariff kicks in. And I mean, that tariff for Switzerland is going to be crippling. It's going to really impact their economy. And, the luxury goods sector has been in a decline anyway, and to have now tariffs like that against watches and every product coming out of Switzerland is really, really going to be devastating for the economy there.
Let's move on to a story from the Financial Times, and indeed you covered it in the Globe and Mail as well. Canada cultivating ties with Nordic countries. Yeah,
I mean, Canada has been desperate, again, because of the whole tariff issue and the trade war with Trump, to kind of expand its trade ties. 70% of Canada's trade is with the U.S., and there's been an effort for a long time to diversify that. And of course, now there's even more impetus to do that. So the industry minister, Melanie Joly, went to Sweden and Finland to try and arrange some new deals, some new trade deals. One of the big issues there is a fighter jet contract. Right now, Canada is supposed to buy 88 F-35s from Lockheed Martin from the U.S. It's about a $20 billion deal. There is a suggestion that Canada is rethinking that because of Trump, and now is looking at a fighter jet from Sweden built by Saab. So, I mean, that could be a really interesting maneuver if that happens, because it could upset Trump further. But Canada appears to want to make some kind of statement about the U.S. tariff situation. So they're starting to seriously look at this aircraft from Sweden instead. So, that's part of what Melanie Joly was doing, but she's also trying to just expand Canada's trade anywhere and everywhere.
And it sort of thinks about two things, doesn't it? The fact that Canada has to diversify away from the United States and is bold and quickly going about doing it, but also this idea of a wider reshaping of the global economy. With Mark Carney, one of his key things is to build the strongest economy in the G7. And is this an opportunity for Canada?
Well, it is, but it takes such a long time. Canada has had a free trade agreement with the EU for almost 10 years, and there's been very little uptick in trade between Canada and the EU as a result of that. It's just been far too easy and far too lucrative for Canadian companies to simply trade with the US. Now, yes, now that seems to be less likely, or for now anyway, they are going to have to look elsewhere, but that's a slow process. It's very hard to kind of change your thinking, change your production, change your whole way of operating towards the US, towards Europe or anywhere else in the world. And it's not only the U.S., Canada also is facing ongoing trade issues with China over canola and other products. So right now, the Canadian government is really kind of looking everywhere it can to expand trade, but it's a slow process.
Let's look at a story that's broken overnight over in the United States. Eric Menendez, who's serving a life sentence alongside his brother Lyle for shooting their parents in 1989 in California. A highly publicized case, something that's been rumbling on our screens for a very, very long time. Eric had his parole hearing and lost.
He did. It was denied. He was denied parole. Now, of course, both of these brothers initially were facing life sentences with no possibility of parole. But because of the public outcry, they were resentenced last spring to 50 years in prison. So that made them eligible for parole. This was the first one. So they're having parole hearings separately. Eric was yesterday. Lyle's hearing is today. And the parole board shot down Eric's application, and mainly because of his conduct inside the prison. He's been using cell phones. He's been dealing in drugs. He's participated in a tax fraud scheme. So the parole board, after something like a 10-hour hearing, said basically, you're really not fit for release at this time. He can try again in 3 years, and there's some other legal options that might get him a new trial. But for now, anyway, it doesn't look good for him getting out anytime soon. And now, of course, Lyle could face a similar type of problem, because another factor in all of this has been, why did they kill their parents? They've argued for a very long time that it was because they faced sexual abuse and that there was a real threat of that. But the parole board kind of played down that and said there was no imminent threat of that. So there's a lot of questions about where this will leave Lyle today.
Paul Waldie, thank you so much. European correspondent at the Globe and Mail in the studio in London. You're with The Globalist, live on Monocle Radio with me, Emma Nelson, coming to you from Studio 4 at Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich. Good to have your company this Friday. The time here in Zurich is just nudging 8:30 a.m. So let's have a look at some of today's other news headlines. California's state Senate has passed legislation to redraw political districts. It's to help Democrats gain 5 more seats in the House of Representatives. The measure will counter similar moves in Texas, benefiting Republicans in Congress. Large crowds of protesters have marched through the Georgian capital Tbilisi in support of independent media. The march was organised by media outlets to protest against what they call the Georgian government's assault on the free press. And the younger of the 2 Menendez brothers, who were convicted of killing their parents in 1989, has been denied parole. Eric Menendez made his bid for freedom before California's parole board. His brother Lyle is scheduled to face his own hearing on Friday. The Menendez brothers killed their parents, Jose and Kitty, with a shotgun as they watched television in their Beverly Hills mansion. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. To Japan now, where heads of state from more than a dozen countries have gathered for the 9th International Conference on African Development, known as TICAD. It's organised by Japan, and Monocle's Ryuma Takahashi reports now from the event in Yokohama.
Here in Yokohama, leaders and heads of states from over 40 African countries have gathered to discuss developing cooperation between Japan and African nations. At Foreign Press Center Japan's press briefing, Toshihiko Horiuchi, Director of Africa Department at Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, explained the role of TICAD.
TICAD is a summit-level international conference on African development launched by Japan in 1993. 1993 was immediately after the end of the Cold War, when African continent was still marginalized. And in this context, Japan, ahead of other countries around the world, called upon Africa and launched this process because of the necessity for international cooperation regarding Africa.
Also, in yesterday's press conference on TICAD, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke about Japan's responsibility for peace and development nowadays, while touching on Gaza issue.
Japan as a leader for peace. And talking about peace, I must reiterate that it is vital to reach immediately a ceasefire in Gaza. And of course, Japan is a champion of development cooperation. As we see on full display here in TICAD, leadership across all these fronts is more crucial than ever. Our discussions at the TICAD summit focus on how partnership with Africa can strengthen solutions the world needs in peace, in global governance, finance, climate action, and digital transformation.
This is a comment from African Union Commission Chairperson Mohamed Ali Yusuf on the opening day.
Together, we can co-create solutions that are not only transformative, but also sustainable and inclusive, ensuring that no one is left behind.
In line with this theme, on the first day of conference, Prime Minister Ishiba proposed the Economic Region Initiative of Indian Ocean, Africa. As outlined in the Yokohama Declaration adopted today, this initiative also aimed to develop logistics networks and ensure stable supply of Africa's critical mineral resources. He also announced the plans to train 30,000 AI professionals across Africa over the next 3 years. In the private sector, Japanese companies are accelerating their expansion into Africa. According to Africa Business Partners surveys last month, the presence of Japanese companies on Africa has been growing year on year, with 535 companies now operating business in Africa. As Japan's domestic market continues to shrink, many Japanese companies view Africa as a final frontier for business expansion. At the TICAD Business Expo, which ran alongside the main conference, I spoke with a representative from Toyota Tsusho's Africa Mobility Division. This Japanese trading company has been in Africa for over a century and now covers every country there with especially their mobility business. She shared insights about Africa's huge market potential for them.
Frankly speaking, the Africa potential is enormous. We cannot expect any other countries. We still have a potential to grow. So we will continue to work with them. As I say, that historically we are very strong in automotive business, but now automotive business has been transformed from a typical business, which is dealer business. We sell only the car and maybe the after sales, but we need more collaboration about the IT area or IoT area. And also for the future of Africa, we are trying to enhance the area of green economy and global health and human development as well. So we have been selling the Toyota vehicles for many years, but in addition to that, our business domain, we would like to challenge these 3 new areas as well.
TICAD 9 was a vibrant conference and expo that showcased Japan's evolving approach to Africa, shifting from aid to investment and partnership. For Monocle in Yokohama, I'm Ryuma Takahashi.
Thank you, Ryuma. You're listening to The Globalist. It's Friday, so it's time for our weekly update from the point of view of Monocle's Andrew Muller. Here's what we learned.
We learned this week of discombobulation at large among American conservatives as they struggle to adjust to the new online manner of California Governor Gavin Newsom, whose official press office accounts have taken to posting demented all-caps philippics such as the ensuing, as read by Monocle's Incoherent Ravings desk chief, Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
Trump just fled the podium with Putin. No questions, nothing. Total low energy. The man looked like he'd just eaten 3 buckets of KFC with Vlad. Is he afraid the press will ask about me? America's favorite governor?
Anyway, we learned that the proverbially upstanding people of America would simply not stand for this bellicose nonsense, and we learned this from ruggedly impartial Fox News arbiter Sean Hannity.
A new, performative, confrontational style. Maybe it wins you points with the loony radical base in your party, but America is not going to vote for that record.
Imagine someone ascending to high office in the United States with a performative confrontational style winning points with the loony radical base in their party. Ridiculous. Could never happen.
Don't take your guns to town, son. Leave your guns at home, Bill.
Anyway, we learned that, though the current US administration professes to be perfectly relaxed about armed citizens swaggering through the streets of American cities toting artillery, that sane countries think long and hard about issuing to train soldiers, some lines are not to be crossed.
We're following new details about the man arrested for reportedly throwing a sandwich at law enforcement in Northwest D.C.
Yes, we learned that a suspect stood accused of assailing D.C. police, not with a pistol, a shotgun, an automatic rifle, or even a grenade launcher, but a sandwich. Actually, you remember that clip we did of everyone pretending to be aghast about former MP Will Quince resigning as minister for whatever it was, which we have since repurposed a few times, with someone just saying whatever the thing is over every mention of Will Quince? Let's have that, but with sandwich.
No,
sandwich.
Surely not.
Sandwich.
This changes everything.
You're tired of
Sandwich.
This changes everything.
What are we going to do?
Surely not.
Very good. I think we may consider the gravity of the situation appropriately conveyed. We learned that, certainly, American media and government alike were determined to react to this, as if it was basically Pearl Harbor multiplied by the assassination of President Kennedy, as details emerged about the suspect and the sinister forces of which he may or may not be an agent.
He was an employee of the Department of Justice. He was an attorney in the criminal division of the DOJ. Attorney General Pam Bondi saying he's been relieved of those duties, saying in part in a statement, quote, "This is an example of the deep state we have been up against for 7 months."
From which we learned that President Donald Trump's campaign to expunge the deep state is making considerable progress, if the deep state is down to flinging Subway wraps at the cops. But we learned that Attorney General Pam Bondi was resolute in her determination to protect DC's thin blue line, grimly declaring thus, as will now be read by Monocle's Grim Declarations desk chief, Monica Lillis.
"If you touch any law enforcement officer, we will come after you."
Unless, obviously...
Newly sworn-in President Trump issued roughly 1,500 pardons on his first day in office and commuted the sentences of 14 of his supporters in connection with the January 6th insurrection.
You beat the cops unconscious with fixtures and fittings torn from the Capitol building, in which case, fine. We nevertheless learned that charges had been filed against the alleged sandwich hurler, though not, perhaps disappointingly...
Oh no.
Assault with a deli weapon. Hey, thanks for coming out. Elsewhere! Specifically, the Czech Republic, we learned that Andrej Babiš, leader of front-running party ANO in the Czech Republic's current general election campaign, has taken his admiration for US President Donald Trump to new heights, or depending on one's perspective, new depths. The two men already had much in common: wealthy businessmen before entering politics, rowdy populist demagogues, not massively keen on foreigners, routinely accused of various non-legal shenanigans, weirdly fond of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's have some generic Central European folk music, atmosphere, and that. Maybe a bit easier on the accordions? Better. We learned that Trump and Babiš now share the quirk of having a prominent lieutenant with apparently murderous designs upon dogs. The Czech remake of US Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, and by her own account of having once shot a misbehaving family pet, no dog, am I right, being ANO MP Margita Balashnikova. We learned via leaked recordings that she had not only schemed to destroy her former spouse's business in an expression of jilted fury, and who among us, etc., but had discussed hiring someone to kill her ex-husband's new girlfriend's dog. Well, quite. Our lawyers tell us we have to make it clear that she denies everything. All right, settle down, Lionel. We did learn it is important to note that said pooch is by all accounts, and despite the nefarious designs of said MP, alive and well. And we learned of one key difference between Babiš and Trump, i.e. that Babiš is more concerned about the dog lover vote than his American analogue. We learned that Babiš had not only undertaken a veritable blitz of canine outreach, which left no Czech mutt safe from a pat on the head from the aspirant Prime Minister, but that Margita Balashnikova had been dropped from the party's candidates list. Yes, she has been hounded from office. Boo! For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Miller.
Thank you, Andrew. And a brand new instalment of What We Learned will air at the same time next week, right here on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist, live from Zurich.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS, banking is our craft.
Time now for a roundup of news from the world of food and drink, and for that I'm joined from London by Chiara Rimella, Monocle contributor and deputy editor of Compact magazine. Good morning, Chiara. How's London looking this morning?
Actually, surprisingly sunny. We've had a sad few days of late summer that didn't quite deliver, but what a better time to think about food, and particularly the stories that I think I've brought you. And I don't know if you're a big fan of canned drinks, Emma, but we'll discuss that in a second.
Indeed. Well, let's talk about canned drinks. They're something that you absolutely cannot escape from, and we're not just talking about what my grandma would call fizzy pop. We're talking about the hard stuff that 3 swigs can have you falling over.
Pretty much, yes. I mean, this has been a long growing trend, I think, in the world of drink. But it's interesting that looking at sort of a food news review of today, The Guardian has an interesting article talking about the tinification of drinks and reporting that Silicon Valley Bank's 2025 State of the US Wine Industry Report says there's been a rise of 29.3% of ready-to-drink products. I mean, this is not a surprise because we can see this proliferating on every single one of our supermarket shelves. As you say, this used to be the case, at train stations where you'd pick up a very disappointing, well, you probably wouldn't actually pick up a kind of very disappointing wine. But people and very serious wine producers are actually turning to this format at the moment because of many reasons that have to do with things beyond cost and convenience, but also many cite the issue of recyclability, and so the fact that this format is more environmentally friendly, it's lighter to transport, it has a lesser carbon footprint, so it benefits the producer and the conscious consumer as well. At the same time, there is, as we have discussed on this program a number of times before, the fact that people do feel like they want to be drinking less, and like this they feel like they can keep an eye on their consumption a bit more, because we all know the tragedy depending on who you are, of going to the restaurant and having your drink topped up without you being able to realize how many drinks you've had. I mean, with a can you're definitely keeping track. However, we have tried in the past to do tastings of wines in a can in the studio at Midori House with the menu. And there is a bit of a haptic problem there, right? Because we're so used to the noise of the cork coming out of the bottle that when you open the can, does it prepare you for the same type of experience? It's tricky.
It's a really tricky one because actually those noises are deliberately created to be appetizing and appealing for anybody who's opening a can of a fizzy non-alcoholic drink. But the issue isn't it, people are now talking, as this article in The Guardian says, it's all terribly serious about sustainability, and it's about people trying to limit their intake of alcohol. But do these cocktails and wines actually taste any damn good?
Well, serious producers are updating their recipes, upping oxygen levels to make sure that, the wine that's canned does actually stay tasty, because there is an issue. The reason why people have been bottling wine in the way that they have done for such a long time also does come down to the actual taste of it. So the quality of the wine that you put inside a tin may be very good, but the same type of approach might not actually work. There is a company called Canetta, which was founded by the sommelier and founder of We Are Owner, who are a really, really popular kind of catering beyond, events and food company. And they have started putting natural wine into cans. And I think this is really interesting because it's going for a very sort of high-end aspect of the market and putting this really, really bright, beautiful branding on these cans and going for a sort of breezy approach, but still keeping the quality of it kind of front and center.
Let's move on to a story that you wanted to bring to our attention about Hong Kong. It's not doing well in terms of restaurant.
Yeah, this is a really interesting long-form investigation by the South China Morning Post. And they're saying that Hong Kong's restaurant is in practically its worst crisis in a very long time, and that restaurants are shutting everywhere. And I think that this is interesting because with Monocle has done a number of stories over the years about the popularity of certain of its dining establishments. I remember stories about queues and how ubiquitous they felt like they were outside of restaurants in Hong Kong. And to see this happening now, it may feel quite dispiriting. Basically, the South China Morning Post says that there are issues, with shrinking margins, with people being lured by options across the border in Shenzhen. Interestingly, that there are a number of industry leaders making comments about this and saying that, the scene needs to transform itself, and so perhaps come up with new concepts, cheaper meals. I mean, the offer in Hong Kong is already so varied that it's tricky to imagine something that can tick all these boxes. But, lawmakers are also getting involved, saying that restaurants should close early if they feel like they're not really making it. But it is a real crisis. The unemployment rate in the food and beverage industry is practically double the cities overall. So it's at 6% versus 3.5%. So let's hope that the diners, the restaurants and the dessert shops can survive, because I would argue that for decades, this has been one of the most appealing aspects of travel to Hong Kong.
Indeed, it has. Let's head closer to home, at least for where we are today in Zurich, up the road in Bern. I wouldn't say it was a gimmick, but it's quite a spooky idea of a new restaurant.
Yes, it's an idea to open a restaurant inside a cemetery, or more precisely inside the former urn rooms of the cemetery in Bern. Well, I think this is interesting because it calls into question the use that we make of spaces in our city. These urn rooms were no longer used, but the building is architecturally protected and very beautiful. And so what to do? In certain cultures, hanging out at a cemetery might be considered completely shocking. Certainly where I'm from in Italy, which is where this story was picked up in La Repubblica. But in other cultures, including the UK here, but in Nordic countries, certainly, people will go for runs in cemeteries. It's certainly not considered a disrespectful approach to have. What's, I think, quite self-conscious about this project is that the restaurant, which will open early next year, will be called La Vie, meaning life. And so I think that there is a deliberate kind of acknowledgement of the fact that there is a sort of inconsistency there, or at least a sense of sort of strangeness. But the space is not just going to be used as a cafe for the cemetery, but it's going to be also used for literary and cultural events. The idea is very much to open it to the public. And it's not the first time that cafes do open inside cemeteries. There are other examples in other cities. I do think that when we look at the amount of places that have benefited from cafes and from bringing people together, it's not that surprising that even a place like a cemetery might want to, I suppose, bring an element of this into the picture.
So the one thing that sort of stops me in my tracks is in this one story about Bern is that the restaurant will be inside the crematorium, which is a little bit close to the bone.
Yeah, tricky, but there is the urn rooms, actually, which is where they used to store the urns. So I think it's a bit different, I would say. And also, the architecture is so beautiful. The new design will be all Belle Epoque. So I think by the time you're in Lévis, you will feel very lively and refreshed.
I should hope so, too. Finally, Chiara, talk to us about nuts.
Well, I think this is a story about kind of a boom and bust and shortage in things that people are really, really passionate about nowadays. We've talked about pistachio shortages on this program before. Now the much patented and the shortage of matcha is coming or has come. There are reports that the harvest this year in the Kyoto region of Japan wasn't quite as bountiful as hoped. And we all know that for some reason, these green products, both pistachios and matcha, have become hugely, hugely popular around the world, to the point that you're finding shops are getting through their reserves of matcha, which would have lasted them a month in a matter of days. This coupled with the fact that more and more people are going to Japan, people are just stocking up on matcha when they're going to Japan. Will this mean that we will experience a worldwide shortage of matcha? Probably, but also an increase of the cost of it. And it's interesting because I think in Japan there is a huge respect, of course, for the production of this type of tea. So it will be interesting to see how much the market actually adapts, and whether we will see a growth in the number of growers, or whether the fact that it has to be kept at this level of, complexity and respect for the craft will mean that, Japan is bemoaning a lack of a new generation going into farming for this, because as we all know, it's an aging population, and there is a lesser amount of people willing to go into the farming of this tea. So will the quality of it keep it in and make it into a very, very expensive product, or will the market continue to boom and grow? On the flip side of that, another sort of product that became increasingly popular, particularly in the UK, is Guinness, a big resurgence of a brand over the Christmas period. We saw shortages of Guinness here in the UK. Now it looks like the sales have slightly have not quite been growing quite so much, quite plateaued. Although it is said that this has got to do with the retail aspect of the business rather than in pubs. However, despite all this, and despite the incredible growth that Guinness has had in the last few months, the parent company Diageo is still struggling. So even a boom like Guinness's doesn't seem to be able to stop the profit slump at Diageo.
Chiara Romella, thank you so much for joining us on the line from London. You were the Globalist live from Zurich. Finally, here in Switzerland, people are being asked to choose the design of the new banknotes. An online survey has been launched asking the Swiss for their views on 12 possible new designs. And to tell us more, I'm joined now by Carlo Zilberschmidt, who's the Senior Account Manager at Wink Creative, Monocle's sister company. Good morning, Carlo.
Good morning.
Good to have you round the microphone. We haven't got very long on this, so you're going to have to very quickly describe these designs, some of which are quite lively.
Indeed, they are very lively. So the Swiss National Bank actually launched a contest to relaunch our banknotes, which were only launched in 2016. So this is the next series for 2030. And you would wonder, why do we still need banknotes? But actually, there are new security technologies. There are actually also still 24% of Swiss people paying with cash. So the run is on to find the best design.
Right. Now, this is where the fun starts, because some of them are quite colourful.
Yeah, it's nice to see that people took the theme that the National Bank launched, Switzerland and its altitudes, in very different aspects. So there are banknotes with mountains and lakes, which you would expect. But there are also some designs that feature dinosaurs, for example, or one that's particularly creative, a fruit cake.
Yes, now this is the thing, isn't it? It's the 200 franc note, which has a cake on it, but is a lurid purple. Now that is a colour which, by all accounts, is streng verboten in these parts, absolutely banned. But from your sort of like your branding head, is this a good thing to have?
Well, I think the colours might need a bit of refinement, but the good news is...
We think about turning it down a little.
Yes. And indeed, actually, it's not the final designs. They will still go through some testing. And the vote that is currently going on within the Swiss population to find out which are actually the preferred designs will help identifying which are the no-goes and which things might need another round.
Okay, and it's a favourite thing, isn't it? That people do still take quite a lot of national pride in their banknotes. It becomes a sort of whenever any country decides that it's going to redo its banknotes, it sort of galvanises a nation's spirit. Does that happen here in Switzerland?
Absolutely. When this survey was launched, it was on the front page of some of the country's newspapers. Instantly, people started debating the different designs, and it sounds like there is actually quite a high response. Swiss people are incredibly proud of certain elements and that represent their national identity. And the banknote, even the Swiss National Bank says it's like a business card for our country.
It's a very colourful business card of these new plans. So just quickly, with your branding head on, what do you think the Swiss banknote should look like, as opposed to what you're being offered as what the could look like?
Well, it's always nice to see when we combine maybe the more traditional aspects of Switzerland, like beautiful nature, nice lakes, but we also bring in a bit what makes this country so special, which is technology, for example, or in some cases food. Although I think the food option might need a few more tweaks.
Yes, I think we might all agree with you with that one. Go and have a look at it, everyone, at the possibilities of what colour banknotes the Swiss could be dealing with. You won't lose them if you drop them, put it that way. Carlo Silberschmidt from Wink Creative, thank you so much for joining me here in Studio 4. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests, to the producers Chris Chermak back in London, Desiree Bandley here in Zurich. Our researcher was Henry King, our studio manager was Steph Chungu, with editing assistance by Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music's on the way, and the briefing is back in London at midday London time. The Globalist is back at the same time on Monday. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening from us here in Zurich. Have a great weekend.